Hello all, this is JBot with our first battle report. It's my first time doing this, so hopefully I don't screw this up too badly. What you got here today is the Punisher mission that Jim has been working on really hard for the past, 4, 5, 6 months. And he's just about got it worked out. I know we discussed it in the podcast, so here's a first look for those of you who actually haven't read the thread, and I'll put the link down in the show notes. But what this basically is a group of Imperials with 4 TIE Punishers decked out with absolutely everything you could throw onto it. Missiles, bombs, you name it. Along with them is a Gazanti, and there's also 4 TIE Interceptors that aren't shown right now because Jason and I decided not to actually field them originally. The goal of this mission is to get through the screen here of proximity mines. Turrets, these are all single laser turrets that come in the epic ships. And off screen here is actually a pirate base that has a shield kind of structure on both sides and then the base itself. And I'll explain that when we get closer to it. The table is a 3x6, so it's a little bit out of frame. So what you'll see is about halfway through, we'll shift the camera over. That way you'll get a better view of the other half of the table. Here we are on the very first turn. Not a lot's going to happen here, so that's why I'm kind of talking over it. But in general, you have a line of scum ships, mostly headhunters with a few Seeks thrown in there. The headhunters are almost all pilot skill 1. I believe they're all binary pilots. And then the scum Seeks and the last headhunter are a little bit higher level. But what typically happens is about half of Jim's list is going to move first. Then 2 of Jason's Punishers are going to move. Then the other half of Jim's list will move. And then finally, the last 2 Punishers from Jason, which are the named ones, as well as the Gazanti, because obviously the Gazanti moves last, being an epic scale ship. So this first turn, not a lot of excitement going on here, just Jim kind of shuffling around. Typically it's kind of a firing line, a skirmish line that just moves up one for the first turn. And here on our side, Jason and I were playing the Imperials. We do basically the same thing. We're not flying hell's bells with the Punishers. We're taking our time because he will outpace the Gazanti. I know they move roughly the same, but he can actually outpace us pretty quickly if we're not careful. So we're trying to stick into a nice formation, stay solid, and go straight across the table. And that's what you see this first turn. But the only shot that's going to be available to us is actually the Gazanti. So what we're doing is here, see if we can get either the laser turrets into range, which we could not. So instead we decided to go ahead and lay a target lockdown on one of the groups of proximity mines. These have 3 hit points, 3 hull points, and no evade. And for every hull point that you take off of these, it actually reduces the damage it does by 1 if you were to run over the template. So let's say, for instance, we did 2 damage to one of these proximity mines. It would only do 1 damage were a ship to roll over it from that point forward. But in this case, we rolled well using my fancy new dice tower, which you can see in one of the other YouTube videos. And we're actually able to take it off the table with 1 shot. There's no real serious energy concerns on this ship until it starts taking ion damage or we have to do anything fancy with it. Typically, it takes 2 to power the single laser turret that's on the Gazanti, and we feed 2 into that every turn, or I feed 2 energy into it every turn from the move, and then with optimized generators, I get 2 back. So I'm basically running with a full tank most of the way through until we start doing some crazy shenanigans later on, or I start to adjust my movement away from just straight forward. Here we are on the second turn. You can see Jim starting to make, and we had a discussion about this in the podcast, Jim made some pretty critical errors here, and you're going to see it. That's why this isn't the full run mission. And so Jim starts to make a couple critical errors here. And for those of you who are familiar with Ordnance, you know that you do not want to cluster up with these small ships with low hit point or low hull point ships, because we have assault missiles, and the assault missiles can target obviously the ships, but they can also target that proximity mine that's right in the center, and as I mentioned before, has no agility, so it's almost a guaranteed hit, and anything in range 1 is going to take that 1 point of damage. So it's very dangerous to cluster around it or any of the turrets here, because the turrets are also 0 agility ships. They have 5 hull, which is a little bit different from those proximity mines, but they're still 0 agility. So If anything gets too close to them and Jason's able to get range on proximity mine or those turrets, he can focus on those, take an almost guaranteed shot with an assault missile, and lay damage on all of these other ships regardless of their agility, which is a great way to hit these low agility ships like this, or the high agility ships like the Sikhs. Jim's still moving stuff. We saw him there. He's fighting with the bases on his ships. This is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. The pegs are already a little precarious, and you can see he's fighting it again. Jim's also added, if you see those little black dots, they're little bumpers that go on the back side of drawers so they don't make a loud slamming noise when they shut them. So he uses those to try and keep his bumping shenanigans as limited as possible. But let's be honest, he still bumps stuff, so they're only doing so much. But if he didn't have those, this would look like one of those Coleco football games with his ships just sliding all over the table. So here we continue the rest of the move here on turn 2. Jason's moving up his bigger ships, and you can see he's really pushing them in there, trying to get forward as much as possible, because otherwise he's going to be out of range with a couple of them. And he wasn't able to boost. Obviously, he set his stuff up a little bit too close. But nonetheless, he's still able to get some shots on the proximity mines there in front of him, which is good, because anything you can do to clear that way for the Gazanti is also good. Here I am moving the Gazanti up again, another fancy move, which is just straightforward for. And then we'll have a quick discussion, him and I, about what to do with my action. I'm now in range of those single turbo lasers from these, and my first inclination is to target lock to try and take one of them out. But Jason, my able-minded partner here, decides to have a quick discussion with me and says, you know what, we got to keep the Gazanti alive. Let's take the target lock back off and put a reinforced token on instead. He thinks that's a better idea. After a little bit of cajoling, after a little bit of talking, I agreed with him, and you'll see me drop the focus on him. That's actually from one of the skills that I have as well. But I decided, you know what, you're right, Jason, let me take that, put the reinforced token on it. And what this does is, in a sense, it forces Jim's hand. The single turbo lasers are great. They can still eat through that reinforced token. They can also do a lot of damage to Gazanti, but it makes Jim think about it for a second, and what he decides to do later on, you'll see, is actually use those two turrets to fire on the Punishers instead of the Gazanti, which isn't necessarily a great thing for us because we want the ordnance on those Punishers, but they should be able to withstand it just a little bit, because they all have I cannot remember the name of the thing right now, but the sensor jammers, that's it. They all have sensor jammers, which is really effective against those turrets. Here we continue with the firing phase of turn 2. I am now shifting around all the energy. We have giant energy tokens thanks to Sling Paint. You see me moving them around. It was a little bit confusing, so I had to do it a couple times so Jim saw it. And then off screen here is us rolling dice. We do a little bit of damage, but we weren't able to completely clear out that turret there on the side. And for those of you keeping score, a crit on these turrets or on the proximities actually does 2 damage. We don't draw a card for it. It just does a straight 2 damage. So crits and hits can very quickly take these things out, especially if you have anything that can modify them to do more damage. Here we are continuing the firing phase, doing as much damage as we can, trying to clear out those turrets because those are the biggest threat right now. His ships have to really get in close to do more damage. So this so far so good. Jason and I are pretty happy with what we're doing. We haven't made any serious moves, any serious changes, and you can see roll on the table like normal. No big deal. We saved the dice tower for the big rolls, the important things. So I think this is actually Jim. I'm sorry, this is Jim actually firing his single turbo lasers, the turrets, into our formations, and I think off screen here Jason's rolling his evade dice with his Punishers. I think he'll agree with me that my crazy dice tower and its superpowers, as we all know, if you paint your ships, they roll a little bit better dice. I think now we know that if you build your own dice tower, it's more powerful than just rolling on the table. And we saw that, Jason and I did, in our dice rolling today, or during this mission. And I did not let Jim use his dice tower, and I think that was part of the effect, is we were hitting and evading quite well, and he was having a bit of a hard time with it. So now we're finished with turn 2, and we're starting to set up turn 3. You can see Jim taking all the tokens away. It can be a bit of a headache, with this many ships, especially with just one person running it, between all the tokens and trying not to run over yourselves. But now he actually does have a partner with him. He's relatively new, whose name I cannot remember, but he is helping Jim out. The two of them are making their minds up on how they want to move. Jason and I do not have a very complex strategy. Our goal here is to just run forward as hard as we can, as fast as we can, and force Jim into a confrontation. We don't want him to dodge around, to dance around, and be able to get shots on our flanks. We want to force him to come at us straight on, and if he does that, he's going to have a bad day, because the Punishers can lay out a ton of damage out the front with all the ordnance that they have, especially those assault missiles that I mentioned earlier. But the Gazanti's also dangerous as well. If it gets too close, it can't do a lot of damage because of the single laser turret's ranges. But once it gets in there, it actually has the ability, hey, I'm going to target lock instead. I'm going to strip tokens off of one of your ships. And if you don't have a focus, it's really hard to get through that sensor jammer that's on the Punisher. So it's set up as a support ship, and we use it as such. Plus, as long as I can keep a little bit of arc on one of these 3 turrets, I can still fire the single laser and do some damage. So you can see them starting to move their ships here. They're starting to swing around, which is good. I think Jim's strategy would have been a little bit better if he had kept a couple more ships out here to the far right of our formation, the bottom of the screen, and swept in with them instead of just one. Because as you'll see, he starts to bring everything in really close. And Jason and I are over there just kind of whispering to each other, this is going to be ugly, because I think we both know what's coming. He's essentially put himself straight in front of our guns, and all of those Punishers are licking their lips because they've got assault missiles, and they're going to light him up. It's a very ugly combat turn that's going to come up here in just a minute, once all the moving's done. You see that little template, this little green template. I cannot remember who makes those, but Blake provided Jason and I with a couple of these. They're really neat templates for moving ships around when they get blocked. What they do is they actually have little bumps and little spaces to fit on the bumps or the guides on the bases. So they sit there on the corner, and you can tell exactly where the ship is supposed to be. It's a little bit better than just using one of the movement templates. And it doesn't take up a ton of room in your box. I do wish it had a little bit of a handle or something to get it off the table, but otherwise it's really useful, and we started using them all the time. So maybe Blake, the ex-father, will know exactly who makes those. Here we see Jason starting the move on the Punishers. Again, he slowed up. He knew what was coming. We knew they couldn't get to us face to face if we slowed up just a little bit, and so that was the plan. Slow up just a little bit with the Punishers. That way he can keep Jim's ships just out of range 1, so he can fire pretty much all the ordnance he has, and make Jim and his partner have a very, very bad day. So we'll continue this in the second video. I hope everybody's liked it so far.